Good afternoon and welcome to SD Works Payroll Question Time. My name is Natalie McDonnell. I'm Senior Events Manager at SD Works and delighted to be moderating today's webinar. As always, we are joined by our brilliant panel of speakers, as you can see on your webcams. We work quite quickly in getting the latest legislation, government guidance, including any other outstanding questions from the last session to form the agenda of the day. So we want to make it as practical and informative as possible for you. We do welcome questions during the webinar, and we always try and chalk off some time at the end for some Q&A. So if we get time to do the Q&A session, then that's when we'll be answering your key questions. But of course, if any come in when we're discussing a certain topic, I will pose those to our speakers as well. We run polls during these webinars, so please do engage with us, please do vote, give us your opinion. We like to run these polls and it helps steer our conversations. And on slides and recording, I do get a lot of people always asking if these will be available. Of course, we'll have these sent out to you after the webinar as well by email, and we'll get them shared on the website too. A quick disclaimer, I'll have to read this out just quite quickly. So the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries. In some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, in a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. So here are our speakers. If you've been to our Payroll Question Time webinars before, you'll know them all very well, but it's really great that we've got some new people join us today as well. So I'm going to ask each of our speakers to do a quick intro. So first, Simon.
Hi everyone and welcome to the webinar today. I'm Simon Parsons. My title at SD Works is Director of UK Compliance Strategies, and I look after the legislation compliance of our pay solutions predominantly. I also sit on the BCS Payroll Specialist Group. I'm the chair of that group and a group called Irene, and join in with Sam on a number of panels at the CIPP, and I sit on a number of consultation groups at the HMRC, DWP and BEIS. If you want to know what those all stand for, do a little Google and it'll tell you which government departments they are.
Thank you, Simon.
I've been in the industry, I'm going to say, I actually joined Centerfile back in 1984, so I'm still young.
Thanks, Simon. Lou, over to you.
Hi everybody, my name's Lou Gray and I'm the Head of Transitions and Operations at EY Absolute, and we're a managed payroll service as well as managed services. I have 32 years experience in payroll, 20 of those have been based in a finance team, and I'm also have an accountancy qualification. The 20 years in the finance team was based in local government in Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou. Sam?
Hi everybody, I'm Samantha Mann. It's my privilege to be the technical lead at the policy and research team at the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. It's where I lead a small but committed team, as Simon said, in responding to consultations and attending consultation forums, predominantly for HMRC, but also with BEIS and DWP and the pensions regulator. So yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Is there anything else? Oh yeah, 40 years since I very first did wages. So if it's a competition for time served, then I think I'm winning the prize today.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. I'm Kirsty Rogers. I have no payroll experience at all. I am an employment partner and at DWF, which is an international listed law firm. And I'm also the executive head of the Manchester office, which has a small number of about 1,000 people in it, although very few at the moment. And I also run DWF Responsibility, which is part of the business that speaks to leadership teams and boards about their business's obligations, which will include matters like making sure employees are treated and paid properly, amongst other things, and a lot on diversity and inclusion. 30 years for me, just a child.
Thank you, Kirsty. And Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy from the pensions regulator. My main role there is liaising with the payroll industry, and my background's all payroll prior to the regulator job, and I suppose it's public sector, private sector, small, large, software house, all that sort of stuff. And I'm trying to think how long. I think I started in payroll in 83, 4-ish, same sort of time as Simon. We're equal probably. But yeah, good. That's me really. Looking forward to see what we discuss today.
Well, thank you, everyone. So we're going to just jump into what our discussion topics are for today. So as you can see on the slide, we're going to be talking about national devolved restrictions, extended job retention scheme, the job support scheme, the bonus, off payroll working, and then at the end we'll have time for Q&A as well. So on this slide then, on the national devolved restrictions, we do actually have a poll to sort of kick us off. We like to sort of run a bit of a temperature check before we start some of these conversations and discussion topics. So on screen, you will be able to see our first poll very shortly. I'm now launching that. So we are asking, are your business's working arrangements impacted by the new measures? No, we have full closure with only a skeleton staff. We have not closed and are able to continue. We are continuing using home working, or we have a mix of open and closed working places. So whilst that poll is open, I'm going to go to Kirsty to ask if you what you anticipate the sort of popular vote might be for this one.
I'm going to hedge my bets a bit, Natalie, but I think it's between we're continuing using home working or we have a mix of open and closed working places. What I'm feeling is that most organisations really want to try and keep going if they can. Full closure is really jeopardising businesses fundamentally, and a lot are really on the edge. There are some who can continue, but given the announcement on Saturday, I think that will be that means that a lot of people won't be continuing in the way that they were before. But I'd be interested to see, because it obviously does very much depend in. Oh yes, that was good. That was good, wasn't it?
41% continues in home working, 39% a mix, like you say. So thank you everyone for getting involved in that poll. So my first question then to you, Kirsty, is all parts of the UK are now facing some sort of lockdown or area or previously tier restrictions, but what does this mean for business employers and their employees?
And I think that, I mean, it winds the clock back significantly to August, but we had this sort of rather dramatic announcement on Saturday night, which we waited ages for, on Halloween. It's a bit scary, wasn't it? And after England was put into lockdown on Saturday night, there then was this sort of urgent review of the job retention scheme, which we got an update on last night, or yesterday afternoon, and again. And that now means that all businesses can now use the scheme if they're eligible to put people on furlough, and that actually it was a lifeline to many people, although it came very, 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 very late in the day, which has caused quite a lot of anxiety, particularly, I would say, amongst the people on this session, including the panel, but also everybody listening in, I would say. And what it means is, certainly in England, it's what they're saying under the new national restrictions guidance is to help contain the virus. Everyone who can work effectively from home must do so. Where people can't, including but not limited to people who work in critical national infrastructure, construction or manufacturing. They should continue to travel to their workplace. And I've taken from that critical national infrastructure, construction and manufacturing has been called out. So if you're in a sector that's not called out, you really need to think carefully about asking employees to come into work where you're in a situation of a national lockdown. They only want people to travel if they absolutely have to. And what working effectively means is going to be fairly narrowly interpreted, I would say. So if you've got employees who are concerned about coming into work and they don't really need to come into work, they are probably going to be justified in saying they should be allowed to work from home if they can. So I think there's going to need to be a full review about that. Obviously, the situation in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland is slightly different. In Scotland, we've got a 4-tier provision, which is going to last until March 2021. And depending on where you are in Scotland and which tier you're in will depend very much on whether you should be working at home. But the job retention scheme will be available for everybody in Scotland as well as in England, now that England's gone into lockdown, and also in Wales and Northern Ireland. It's interesting that the regulations for Scotland came into force on the 2nd of November, and in Wales they've also topped up the pay of care workers who are forced to self-isolate. So there seems to be a general understanding that there needs to be a lot more support around everybody in any location and at any level of tier in terms of pay and ability to put them on furlough. Lou, were you going to say something about Northern Ireland since you're there?
Yes, absolutely. So Northern Ireland, we tightened our restrictions actually on the 16th of October, and that was for a 4-week period. So it's coming to an end on the 13th of November. But today, if you listen to the news, you can hear that there are people asking that that be extended for another 2 weeks after that, probably in line with England. What we have is that you should avoid all unnecessary travel, and travel to work and education and everything which is essential that people do, that they're being advised to walk, cycle or use private transport. There's also businesses, again, is, if you can work from home, that you work from home. And there are a number of services that you're not allowed to be part of. Essential health services are okay, but anything like hairdressers, which is devastating for me, and nail technicians are a definite no. And then the hospitality, and that's the biggest thing in Northern Ireland at the moment. Our hospitality has been greatly affected. They were told to shut on the 16th of October. You're allowed to go in and buy and come out, but there's no sitting in. And so the hospitality in Northern Ireland is really crying out for more help and more assistance. So it'll be interesting to see how the next few days pan out for us here. Will there be another extension after the 13th of November? It'll be interesting to see what happens.
And I think the other thing that was worth saying is that on the 4th of November, the shielding guidance has been updated to provide that clinically extremely vulnerable people are strongly advised to work from home and they shouldn't attend their places of work. And they've extended the people who are covered by the shielding guidance. So it's expanded to include adults with Down syndrome and adults on dialysis or chronic kidney disease. It does say the clinically extremely vulnerable can be furloughed. They can also get sick pay, and it is the business's choice. But it's interesting that they are expecting all those people to stay at home, and it's expanded, and they're going to get updated letters in relation to that. So very much a quick rollback. There's been no end of new guidance and regulations come into force in the last 2 or 3 days.
And what of the Lou, on the tax relief, the latest news on tax relief implications?
I think it's important that everybody is aware, if they haven't been made aware of already, because the HMRC have been talking about it, that there is work from home tax relief that you can apply for. And it is a very simple and straightforward thing to do. I mean, you go on to your personal tax account and that you can apply for it online there. And if you go on to the government website, you'll be able to click there go in and open up your personal tax account and then set that up, and that comes to £6 per week or £26 per month, and HMRC then will review your personal tax allowance.
Yeah, and there's been a number of portal improvements these past few weeks with HMRC publicising them for home working, uniform, even motoring expense. So the government are making it very easy, and they're really promoting these things. I've forgotten the name of the chap now that's responsible for the government department, but they are simple. They're meant to take 5 minutes. There is kind of that caveat, isn't there, Lou, that you need your personal tax account credentials really, which might take a little bit longer. But if you're already set up, it doesn't take very long to do that.
It doesn't. I mean, I rolled it out to my team a few weeks ago, shared the information with them, and I think they were like, oh, it's HMRC, I'm not going to do it, it'll take too long, basing it on our chat lines. But they did eventually go and do it. It was as easy as a couple of clicks, and within 24 hours, I mean, their tax code was showing as being revised, which was impressive. You know, that is good for HMRC. It's also reassuring to people who are looking for that extra bit of allowance because they are working from home. You know, as the tagline says, every little does help.
And is that, can you backdate that as well?
Yes.
Yes, you can. I mean, whenever I went on to it, the date that the Inland Revenue had on the website was the 23rd of March, which was the official start of lockdown. So that is there.
Great. Okay.
And you can claim back years for people that have been working home generally, because some people may not have realised that if they're just doing casual, regular home working, that these allowances have been available to them. Same with the uniform, tools, and even motoring expenses for work that you can claim. But they've made it much easier. In the old days, there were kind of agents set up that would do this on their behalf, but they take sizable chunks of the refund money, and here we have HMRC actually trying to facilitate it as easy as possible. If you need help, fine, but make sure it's affordable help.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. And a question on, if people can't actually work from home, you know, what can they do if they can't work from home?
Do you mean they can't work from home because they're clinically vulnerable or because of their job? Or
yeah, I suppose it's probably for various reasons. It's for clinical reasons.
If you can't work from home and your work's open, you should go to work if it's not possible. If you can't work from home and you can't go in, then you may be put on furlough. If your employer puts you on furlough and it's by agreement, but you can't, it depends on the reasons why you can't work from home. If you can't work from home and your business is shut because of the regulations, again, you can be put on furlough.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Thanks. I think that's all our sort of key questions on this one.
Yeah.
I'm going to take us through to our next topic.
I was just thinking, Natalie, there are some elements of the new restrictions which allow people to kind of help each other. So there are this sort of formation of childcare bubbles, etc. And I think there's an element of looking at some of the detail just to check what you can do. But it is difficult because it's sort of, don't go to work unless you have to go to work. Don't do this unless you have to do this. And we are a little bit in that world at the moment, but there are elements of thinking you can actually form childcare with other people and share. They call it a childcare bubble with another household for the purposes of informal childcare where the child is under 13. And so it's just thinking, what are your options a little bit to make it possible? I know it's a struggle sometimes for families. I'm finding it with mothers where they're having to balance childcare responsibilities. You could say fathers should be there as well, and I'm sure some are, but the predominance is more towards mothers, I think, in reality still, from the TUC statistics, etc., that they're the ones that are impacted as the primary care for children, or even older people. So it is tough again. but there are, I think, more flexibilities this time round than we had in March.
Yeah, I think you can have nannies in as well, who that's not necessarily your childcare bubble. If they are required to come to your house to work, and I think it says nannies and cleaners, then they can still come in.
Yeah, no, it's very much much more widespread in terms of the coverage, and therefore more complicated. And as Simon said, I think it's important to, if you haven't already done so, to spend some time absorbing the information. There's quite a significant chunk of information on gov.uk for who has to stay open or who can stay open, who has to close. For example, as Lou mentioned, hospitality's taking a real hit. But if they've diversified into takeaways and deliveries, then they can stay open for that purpose. And interestingly, the key question on my mind on Saturday, after I'd listened to Boris and we went straight into Strictly Come Dancing, was could Strictly Come Dancing still be shown this week after we went into lockdown? And I have a feeling, looking at the gov.uk guidance, that it's possible that it probably will do, because it's within one of those exemptions in terms of high value but at limited distances, into limited impact. So you know, take a moment or two, well, I say a moment or two, a good 10 minutes to absorb all of the information. I mean, what we're hearing, of course, is that because we're not as strictly applying the only key workers are allowed to go out to work, everybody else must stay at home rule, we're seeing that kind of push to the limits in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. Oddly enough, we were discussing this just yesterday, and when we came off our call, I was just in time to catch Boris saying, everyone's got to follow the rules. You know, if you want to stand a chance of spending any time together in December at Christmas time, then you've got to follow the rules now in order to get these figures down and get the rate of infection down. So, you know, we've got that carrot dangling in front of us, and hopefully it won't dangle too far if we all follow the rules.
Yeah, because what we
were
were
saying, sorry, it's worth saying that the rules are different still in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So don't treat your whole workforce exactly the same.
No.
Isn't the challenge that when people are suffering from their space isn't really big enough to have work from home, or they're mentally challenged by that lack of isolation and everything else? I know TPR had people going to the office just for those sort of reasons. They couldn't really work from home. And I was trying to look to see whether or not we've had an update to see whether or not those people can still go into the office. It seems that that would be worthwhile. The office is socially distanced and safe. In fact, they've done a review of the office to say instead of that 600 people used to go into the office, is only allowed 93 maximum now to maintain the social distancing. And I think we have about 30 people going in because of needing for their own welfare and just the practicality of not being able to work from home. So I don't know if
the wording is if in England, workers may leave their home to work only if it is not reasonably possible for them to work from home. So you're probably looking at a risk assessment around those kinds of things. And I think, you know, it is really important that actually risk assessments are done. People can't work effectively from home and you ask them to, you're responsible for that as an employer. And similarly, if you make them come in and that's a problem for them, you've got to do a risk assessment about that as well. So we're back to sort of extra vigilance around how we treat people and what we expect them to do. But I think it's got to be closely examined, because that reasonably possible is quite a broad term.
So we did build a poll, which Andy's just led us into very nicely, which I'm going to launch, because what we were discussing when we were putting together the session for today was actually all about, can people work effectively from home? Like Andy says, if you're not set up to work from home, if you've got, I don't know, children that have been sent home because someone, you know, a bubble has been affected and they're isolating 14 days, does it impact their well-being? Do they need to get in the office? We discussed training and onboarding new employees. Can that be done remotely, or can it only be done face-to-face? So it's really interesting to get your views here. So I can see most people have voted, which is great. While we've got the vote still open, Lou, I'm going to ask you what your thoughts are on this.
I think very much at the moment, as has already been said, people's mental health and well-being have to be considered as well. So, I mean, as a payroller, you're already dealing with furlough. I've no doubt that HR are also managing their businesses' mental health and well-being. But then also, as a manager, I have a responsibility to my team. So it's balancing everything together, which I find as a manager, my tasks have increased in this side of it. We're now nearly 8 months into working from home, and it all started off, people were excited and they were looking forward to working from home. The reality is that this is it for now. In Northern Ireland, you're expected to stay at home if you can work from home, and I'm lucky to work in a business that has been able to facilitate that. But we're still dealing with individual team members, and it's not just in my business, you know, in a lot of businesses where you do need that extra support and help, because it's not just, I'm lucky I have a dining room that's now converted into an office. I had taken over my daughter's bedroom at one stage. I'm lucky. There's so many people, you know, maybe do live in a bedsit or do share a house, so they are in their room all day, every day. And I'm sure, like myself, Zoom meetings and team meetings at the moment are relentless. So you've gone from an office environment where it was face-to-face meetings and you're able to get out, walk about and have fresh air, whereas we're stuck. Well, I always have my headphones on so that I'm concentrating on what I'm doing. But I mean, that can go on for 4, 5 and 6 hours at a time at the moment. So it's very much about, I think, considering everybody's feelings. You know, do they want to go back into the office? You know, is the office prepared for them? Is there pressure to come back in? I mean, I do have colleagues who are under pressure to get back into the office in Northern Ireland, because there is that distrust still, even after 8 months, even after you've proven that the business is running, that there is still an issue. And I think that's going to be interesting to see. It'll depend on the business and where you are, obviously, in the country. So, yeah. So 47% is considering the well-being, our workplace is open to offer choice, which I think is, you know, a great place to be in for 2020. And then our employees work from home. We've closed our workplace, 41%. You'd like to hope that they've closed the workplace and everybody has been, there's been conversations and people are aware, because I think that's important as well. I think what I've learned this last year is people do like to talk and they do like to share, and it's what you do with that information.
Yeah.
It's probably worth saying, you know, we were talking earlier, the Charity Protectors revealed in a report that 20% of employees who've raised concerns about furlough fraud, but also about health and safety, have been dismissed because of their actions, which is terrible. And also the Resolution Foundation that has found that a large proportion of employees surveyed worry about catching COVID in the workplace, don't know how to raise health and safety concerns. But that is going to come out, and actually I think that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue for people. You know, how well are they? How are they managing in the dark nights that we've got now and the winter? It's a very different position than it was in March.
So in my business in Belfast, EY have allowed us to have me time, which means that you can have an hour. You know, you still have to work your basic hours, but you're allowed to take time out during the day when the light is still bright, and you're allowed to go out and stretch your legs. You're allowed to move away from the room. You're allowed, you know, to go for a walk, get some fresh air, take time away from the laptop, and then come back, you know, reinvigorated and ready for the rest of the day, which I think is always a great option for everybody.
I mean, following up on that, Lou, I mean, has this encouraged more people to take time out? Because I mean, effectively, everybody has a lunch break anyway, but so often, you know, you work through your lunch at your desk. But have you found? Sorry, I appreciate the irony of that. But have you found that by EY enabling this kind of 1 hour me time, it has encouraged people to take time away from their desks?
It has. I mean, it has definitely had a positive effect the last few weeks. Whenever you're talking to your team or you're talking to our associates or our senior associates, it is positive feedback. My thing is, for some of my team, they have children and they have responsibility as parents, so they're taking their time to be able to go to the school and collect their children. Or Northern Ireland, as you maybe aren't aware, that we had closed down the week before Halloween. So instead of a week's holiday for the schools, there was 2 weeks. So then I had team members who were juggling again childcare, children at home and their work, so it's being effective, yes, to have it, and there are a lot of people really appreciate it, but at the same time we're back to payroll is demanding in the middle of any month for those 2 weeks, and juggling your childcare as well.
No, indeed.
Very good. It looks like we're moving on to extended job retention scheme. Is that right,
That's
Natalie?
right. Move to this slide for a short while.
Okay.
So, I'm going to pose this to you, Simon. What do we know now about this? What is the latest on the job support scheme?
Have there been any announcements today that have changed it? Oh, we're all moving into job retention scheme ending on October, and the whole world changing to job support scheme and getting back to work. But from the announcement, and actually we're all desperate, I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on us all to get this JSS running and up for the first, which was last Sunday, and magically the guidance was published on Friday night. So here we are with it after 5 o'clock as well. So it's kind of, here we are after closing time on Friday, the information is published, and we're all panicking. ACAS even published their guidance on templates, wording, and come 4 o'clock, or was it 5 o'clock? 5:30, 7:30. The announcements made that a job retention scheme extension is applied. So what is it? It's CJRS phase 3. Do you want to call it that? Totally different. Don't need to have been furloughed before, and it includes anybody that's been reported to HMRC up to the 30th of October. So they don't have to be furloughed before. So new employees, I see lots of things on social media. Someone joined on the 2nd of October and reported them on the 31st. Do they qualify? No, they don't. If you reported them on the 30th, they would. But if you reported them on the 31st, that's after the announcements. So the government seems to apply those sorts of qualification cut-offs of thinking otherwise they know from history that thousands of companies seem to suddenly form, and lots of relatives or people or seem to be added as employees, and claims are received to the tune of billions. So they put in these sort of protection measures. So is that a good starting point? Maybe we'll introduce some others, but the job retention scheme will pay 80% of reference salary, usual hours, for time not worked. And it has brought in a little bit of an angst dimension to it, as the guidance that was published yesterday in the policy paper implies that for people that have previously employed, whether they were on furlough or not, were previously employed to the 20th of March, it's based on their earnings up to that original cut-off point. But for new people, it's on their earnings for the 2021 tax year between their start date and the furlough date, which may seem like employee A working the same hours and same normal pay rate as employee B, but employee B was employed later. Employee B will be paid more. But of course, employee B hasn't qualified for any of the furlough before. So is that a good place to start with? And I'll let some of the others come in. But reference salary and usual hours, some sort of guidance has been issued. I've got to say, with job support scheme, we didn't know what that was because no one specified what it was. Well, is that true? Actually, they did on Friday night.
And I think something else that was mentioned, sorry, was that the government are going to review all this in January and decide then, you know, have economic circumstances improved enough to maybe employers contribute more.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, indeed. So we know from the policy paper, as Simon said, that the 80% to a cap of £2,500 per month for furloughed hours. So again, as we saw with the flex furlough, you know, that flexibility is still allowed. That's coming through as well. And the £2,500 cap is prorated according to non-working hours. But those rates will stand true until the 31st of January. During January, and as I was reading the policy paper, I thought, oh, here we go again. We're going to be once again waiting for maybe 12th hour confirmation, or there'll be early confirmation of what the rates are going to be in February and March, but you know, later guidance. So sorry if I sound as if I'm having a dig, I'm not. But we do seem over, particularly throughout October, when there was constant flux and constant change about JSS. JSS has been extended. Oh, now we've got JSS open, we've got JSS closed. Here's a policy paper, but let's, you know, there's going to be more detail in the guidance, and as Simon said, the guidance came at 7:10 on a Friday night, less than 24 hours before, or just over 24 hours before it's due to come in. So I don't know about everybody else. I, for one, was actually quite relieved when it didn't come in, because that saved an awful lot of reading. But interestingly, although it's been withdrawn, the guidance is still available on gov.uk. So I don't know whether that suggests that maybe we'll see it resurrected again in the future. But certainly we know for sure it's not going to happen before the 31st of March. So we can be reassured on that note.
There's some update on redundancy on this one as well. I don't know if do you want to come in there, Kirsty, and if you know.
Yes, obviously the timing was pretty dire in relation to the changes. A lot of people, a lot of organisations had taken steps to collectively consult and end employment to coincide with the end of the what was supposed to be the end of the CJRS on the 31st of October. So many letters went out on Friday telling people that they were redundant and even making payments of redundancy and accrued holidays and things like that, only to be told that actually they could have stayed on furlough, and then that changed again on Thursday. So we're now in a position where people who were made redundant could be brought back, provided they were in employment on the 23rd of September up to the end of October. But of course that presents all kinds of logistical difficulties where you may have made redundancy payments, made holiday pay payments, and you will need to get those back, and you need to consult again with your employees and bring them back on board. And if you are going to use the CJRS, you need to have an agreement in place, and if it's retrospective, it's going to need to be in place by the 13th of November. So a huge amount to do in effectively a week. If you are going to bring people back from redundancy, but there are also a lot of people mid-redundancy process at the moment, and obviously this then throws into any consultation process. Can't you just keep me on CJRS even if my job isn't going to be there? The answer to which is yes, probably, but you're still going to have to keep paying employer contributions for NI and pension, and people will continue to accrue their holiday. But it's very, very challenging for businesses trying to manage all of that and consultation and all the changes that are going on. But yeah, in theory, you can bring people back, but if you're going to do it, you need to get onto it pretty quickly.
We've actually just had a question come through from Caroline. She asked, I'm just going to read the question out. She says, to try and mitigate redundancies, we've got approval for our employees to reduce their contracted hours by 20%. My understanding is if we fully furlough an employee, their pay will be based on the same period of last year when they're working full contracted hours. However, if we have someone working flexi furlough, Would they therefore be worse off than fully furloughed, as we would claim based on their new reduced contracted hours?
You, Simon.
Yeah.
I suggest no, because even under the job support scheme, the reference salary and usual hours are subject to a 3-test process. Under the extended job retention scheme, if they're already an employee, the usual hours and the reference salary was set in March. But you have no basis to change it unless it's a new employment altogether. And I tend to say that's continuous. So they're actually set already. Any thoughts there, Kirsty? Do you see it that way, or would you say because they've negotiated a new contract, that's an entirely new employment?
Well, it's a change of terms. They've agreed a change of terms. So depending on the way that's worded, that will very much depend on what you've agreed to. But usual pay, if anyone challenged it, is very clearly set out in the CJRS, isn't it?
It is. Yes. I mean, it's a difference between whether they're considered variable, so there's an element of interpretation on whether you think actually they're on fixed terms, in which case it works as if it carries on, or variable, where it's actually based, the cut-off point was March. So it's a strange one. Another angle is, of course, on maternity and parental protections. The current policy paper doesn't mention anything beyond that law will be brought in. So at the moment, we're still waiting. There's similar protections that were brought in for parental leave and maternity will, by implication, apply even for the extended job retention scheme. So you won't base it on what they actually had, you'll base it as if they'd worked properly in similar protection.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, go on, Sam.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say that obviously the policy paper covers some of the key features at this stage that it's deemed that employers need to know. And of course, it talks about whether or not an individual would have been eligible under the previous CJRS scheme or not. And of course, that it signifies which period you would use, as Simon said, to calculate the reference pay. And it talks about eligibility for CJRS, whether or not they actually were claimed for under the CJRS. But of course, what the policy paper also confirms is that full guidance is due on the 10th of November as the claim process goes live on the 11th of November. So we're hoping that in the final kind of print of guidance, I suspect we'll see some form of hybrid to what we've seen before, but we should get confirmation, Caroline, that would help certainly clarify that really sticky point. But as I say, based on the guidance, the policy paper as written, it talks about where they were eligible before, then you would use the reference period as previously stated.
Thanks all for that. Another question, a couple more questions. So Joanne asks, if you had an employee on unpaid leave from the end of March till now, as it didn't qualify for the original furlough scheme, what would be their reference salary as they were only paid for 3 weeks in March?
I think there's an element of looking at the guidance. It might be understanding why they were on unpaid leave during that period of time, because they are accruing holiday rights if you actually retain them as an employee as well. Is that necessarily understood? So for everybody's entitled to 5.6 paid weeks leave a year, which is based on their average of 52 paid weeks. Ignore any 0 weeks, so you would discount any week that was 0 just on the holiday side. So they're actually building up a holiday right. If you paid them, it would be based on the weeks that you've had. In relation to furlough, I think it's an interesting question to explore. What do you think, Sam? Yeah, so we were saying they've been paid something, but in March.
Yes. So, oh, sorry.
Go, Sam. You go.
Yeah. No, you go, Andy. You go first. Sorry.
I was thinking they've obviously been paid in March, presumably. So they've got a reference salary March or maybe the year back.
Yeah.
So I think you might end up just using that reference salary. So look at the original job retention scheme rules and make sure you get the right reference salary based on those rules, based on what they were last paid in March, or maybe the year back. Remember, it gives you those options, if my memory's right.
Yeah.
It does, Andy, you're quite right. It tells you what to do with this part period. I guess the reason for non-qualification was because they either weren't offered it or they didn't meet the reporting qualification, but there is some earnings basis there.
Yeah.
Go, Sam.
I mean, policy paper just talk about reference pay where they previously haven't been eligible for CJRS. And then in this instance, it would depend again, and forgive me, Joanne, if I've missed a key point of your question, but if they would be on a fixed salary, then you'd be looking at the 80% of the wages payable in the last pay period ending on or before the 30th of October. Now, if they've been on unpaid leave, but they would have normally been on a fixed pay period and they weren't eligible originally for CJRS, then 80% of nothing is nothing. If we were, if there's nothing in that final pay period before the 30th of October, then that's the policy paper would suggest that. But that's for fixed salary, and then of course where your pay is variable, it's 80% of the average payable between these dates are inclusive, and I know Simon mentioned them earlier, the start date of their employment or the 6th of April, whichever is the later, and the day before their CJRS extension furlough period begins. Now, the one thing I've observed with the policy paper is that there's a mixed terminology between eligibility and new employee. So you might not be a new employee, but you might previously not have been eligible. And I'm hoping that the guidance will make clear the difference there between a new employee who may have joined throughout the 2021 tax year and somebody who was previously an employee but just wasn't eligible. So I don't know if that helps.
I'm thinking, Sam. Yeah, and Sam, I'm thinking this is a question we can ask.
Yes, but we have promised through EPG that we won't ask questions until we've seen the final guidance. So anyone who knows the Employment and Payroll Group is the main forum for many of us to sit and access HMRC's various different departments. And the one thing that has kept emails hot since March has been questions on every announcement. Every time the Chancellor stands up and says something, whoosh, the emails just flow through. And I think we've been made to promise not to ask any questions until we've all read the guidance on the 10th. So, which I think some of us have reluctantly accepted, but only reluctantly. And probably Simon snuck some questions through anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't promise to not ask any questions.
No. But any questions put to Simon?
Yeah, no, well, exactly. I confess all of the questions that I asked over the weekend before this have been answered with the policy paper.
That's true.
Yes. I do still have one remaining on annual pay periods, but I'm prepared to wait. So.
We have a few more questions coming in, which I'd like.
Now, Sam just made a comment there about annual pay periods. Lots of directors complained that they missed with the annual payments from the previous scheme. Of course, if they made an annual payment, they're captured under the new scheme because they've made a payment before the 30th of October.
Mm. And you see, but this is the point I'm trying to make, Simon, because of the terminology. As I was reading this, I was looking specifically for the answer of that annual payment, and I thought these are not a new employee, but they weren't eligible under the old CJRS. So it's that question as to whether or not that annual payment that was paid after the 30th of March cut off. 30th of March? No, I've remembered that wrongly. 19th of March. That was made after then will be captured now in this period because they're not a new employee and they fail to qualify because, well, I don't know. This is, as I was reading the policy paper, I'm going to stop talking now because I seem to be digging a big hole for myself. To me, the policy paper doesn't clearly answer that.
Yes, fair enough. Did you have a comment, Andy?
No, I mean, at some point it'd be good to chat about the pension side of things, but I think answering the questions first, it would be the best thing to do.
So
Did
we've
you
got
have
a
another,
question.
Natalie?
I'll just pose some questions to you as they've come in, just specifically on this. Dawn, your question is, we have a number of team members under consultation for redundancy. They're clearly asking why we cannot now keep them on furlough. We're choosing not to do this because of the cost of keeping those people on furlough and the likelihood that we still won't need those roles in the spring. Are there any risks in this?
I think you're perfectly entitled to do that, and I've had this question a number of times today already. It's a choice for you whether you put people on furlough, and provided you're not selecting people not to be retained on furlough because of a protected characteristic, due to their race, sex, age, etc. It's a business decision. There are additional costs in keeping people on furlough, which mean that you have to pay employer NI and pension contributions and accrued holiday, and a lot of organisations are taking the view that it's not right to do that and claim from the government when there is no prospect of those jobs ever coming back. That said, if you want to do it and you can afford to do it, even if there is no prospect, and the way it's written appears that you can keep people on furlough for that period of time, but you certainly don't have to, and provided you apply the process, the consultation process fairly, and without and subject to usual employment law, then that's fine in my view. That helps.
Okay, thank you. Another question, Janet asks, can we still furlough employees who are on long-term sick?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that hasn't. I was going to say that is consistent. Yeah, that's consistent with the previous guidance. There are many consistencies with the previous guidance referred to in the policy paper, and that is one of them. It's for the employer to choose. I think, Kirsty, would you add to that anything? In terms
that's
of your...
right. I agree with that. Yeah.
I think what some employers sometimes need to remember is they can't do both. So they're either on furlough.
It's a choice for the employer.
Yeah.
They have to be paid SSP either by furlough or SSP. So
with the new guidance, it doesn't. Jim says the new guidance says no minimum furlough. There's no minimum furlough period in the guidance.
Yeah.
So can you technically furlough someone for a day?
Yeah,
yes.
I think you can, but there's a minimum claim period of 7 days.
7 days, yeah.
So you have to have an agreement of a minimum of 7 days. All right, but the agreement might be you're not working 1 day.
Or half a day. It really has got no minimum.
Could be half an hour, I guess, even.
It could.
Can you
but the
pay
agreement has to cover a period of 7 days, and the claim has to cover a period of 7 days. But for the claim periods, you may say between the 1st of November and the 7th of November, their unworked hours were 1.
Okay. And can you place employees on furlough during redundancy consultation period?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's been very common.
I'm just getting a few, one more question while we're on this topic. If someone comes back off leaver status, should they repay their redundancy back to the company?
Yeah, because they're not redundant, are they? They've not been made redundant yet. So if you're effectively re-employing them, reinstating them to the position that they were in before. But that is difficult, if they've spent it or done something like that. What do you do there? That it is problematic, and it is a small window. It's only anybody who's been dismissed or made redundant after the 23rd of September. But even so, where payments are made at the moment, lots of people are having to use it for various reasons. They're seeking to reclaim it. It's going to be challenging.
Especially if they paid the mortgage off with the lump sum.
Don't know what kind of redundancy packages you're looking at, Simon, but
Going to say that's a very generous one. Good example though, Simon.
Yeah.
I was thinking more people kind of paying off credit card bills, but yeah, no, good example. And that's actually a really common problem, knowing, how is there a de minimis length of time before you could re-employ somebody, maybe in a different role after redundancy. And I know I've over the years I've heard that question a lot, and I've never yet seen a clearly definitive answer on that one. Is there such a thing, Kirsty? Sorry, I'm sneaking a question in there.
no, that's not relevant to CJR. No, if somebody's redundant, at the point they're redundant, and if there's no alternative for them, then that's a fair redundancy. If a job comes up the next day that wasn't there at the time, then that's going to be okay to re-employ them into it. But it's not, usually you would know there is another job, so actually you should be able to offer that alternative. But it all depends on, at the time you made them redundant, was there a reduced need or completely ceased need for their role and the work that they did, and there were no alternatives. And if there wasn't, then that's fair. And it doesn't matter if a job comes up the next day, although if it does, it looks highly suspicious, because usually that's you do know about that. So
yeah, thank you.
Is that clear? Have I given you a clear answer?
Sorry, you have. Yeah, sorry, thank you. Sorry, I've snuck in there, Natalie. I should have used the chat box and asked the question.
Don't worry. We were still getting quite a few questions on this, very specific questions. But I'm looking at the time, and it's already nearly 3 o'clock. So if we've got time for Q&A, I'll pose these to the panel. But I think we should probably move along.
We can come back to this if you wish, or take some more, because the next little section may be fairly quick. We'll have to see. I think some of it we've covered.
Yeah.
Already. But we can return to this if we go through that quickly. Maybe we've got a bit of Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so what are we on next? Let's bring up the next slide. So the job support scheme, brackets delayed.
Yes.
And
the main element of, do we say much here? It's
gone.
Well, on Saturday, this was coming in December, so it was a hot topic. Today, it's coming in April, maybe.
Possibly, yeah.
Is it? Do you know something?
Well, it's definitely not coming in before April. So I think that's probably the safer way of saying it. So.
But the interesting aspects about this were the concept of fit and naming, I think, because you would have to, well, larger organisations would have to test, and there was also the threat that actually you would form into a publicly named list of employers who claimed on the scheme, and your employees would potentially be contacted to say, are you aware that your employer claimed this money? Were you paid it? So that was an interesting aspect of it. We haven't seen that adapt necessarily into extended coronavirus job retention scheme. Maybe we'll find something in the directions later, but I'm not aware of anything. But the scheme seems a little bit of a nightmare. So I don't know if we really need to say much more about this as it's now on ice.
Yeah, it is on ice, but the only thing that I would say is I'll be interested to see, and because the job support scheme guidance is still available on gov.uk, I'll be interested to see whether or not there is a form of hybrid. Some of the elements that were there in job support scheme that you've mentioned, will they get carried forward to CJRS, and whether which presumably would demonstrate lessons learned from CJRS and administering the CJRS claims.
You thinking in January, when they did a review, maybe to pick up stuff from job support scheme?
I was thinking before then. I was thinking in next week's guidance. We know that there's been a lot of. And I know we're talking about fraud and error in a little while, so we'll probably come back to this. But I can't believe that there haven't been lessons learned from that experience, not only from the employer side but also from HMRC's side. So it'll be interesting to see what comes forward. Ideas from the job support scheme comes forward into CJRS.
Okay. So we've moved along. The end of furlough as it was. So what have we got questions coming up on here? Just really what's the latest here on the grant claim deadline and error and fraud? Who would like to start things off? I'm just seeing if we had a poll on here.
Should I just talk about fraud while you're finding the poll, Natalie?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, please do.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably more to do with also going forward, because obviously furlough is continuing, so more people are on less pay and may be tempted perhaps to do something with their pension scheme. So we're particularly concerned, not only ourselves, regulated, but also FCA, in terms of if you start getting asked questions about do you want to transfer your pension into something else, then really that's potentially a scam. So be very careful about anyone. Cold calling is not allowed anyway, but you might be looking on the internet and something comes up about transferring your pension. It sounds very good. Well, just be so careful. Just be so careful with scams. I know the error and fraud is to do with obviously job retention scheme, but I just want to flag from a pension perspective, just be careful. And if you could share that with your employees, even better. And there'll be a lot of stuff on the FCA website, TPR website, posters and stuff you can just email around. And there's even a little quiz on the FCA website to see if you can be caught by scammers. It's so easy, and just take the quiz. Give the link to your employees to do while sitting at home on furlough. That's my bit anyway. So.
Thanks. Sam, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I would totally support everything that Andy's just said. I think that the number of potential scams has increased since furlough began. So I think that's a really important message to cascade. And so thank you for that tip, Andy. I'll be taking the test myself and getting my other half, because I reckon he's probably the weakest link between us. He's the least kind of risk averse when it comes to responding to these sort of inviting claims. But in terms of error and fraud, of course, the letters, the nudge letters, as they are Natalie described, to remind, to alert people to an employer to the fact that they may have made a mistake on their claim. Certainly HMRC believe that they may have done. The important message is don't ignore those letters, take action, even if you are assured, having audited your processes and audited your claims, that things are not in error, that respond to those letters and have the discussion with HMRC, because it could be, and I know we've said this before, but it could be that you provide a nugget of information that is the missing link to what HMRC have available to them and what you have available to you. And again, this is an example. We know with the job support scheme that HMRC were requiring that the letters, the agreement letters that are produced to confirm the change of employment arrangements, where with the job support scheme, HMRC included in the guidance, where we ask to see these letters, you must provide them. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not we see that with the coronavirus job retention scheme going forward. And of course, this slide is about highlighting the importance of that final claim deadline for period ending the 31st of October. We know that the 31st of July, which was the deadline for the first phase of CJRS, many employers missed that deadline. And then, of course, when you miss that deadline and you potentially miss out on hundreds, if not thousands of pounds worth of claim, you're looking for someone to blame. And if you're a payroll provider, you do not want your clients blaming you for that. So cascade that message that the 30th of November that's a rigid deadline. And if you think that's tight, and I know Simon will probably follow on from this in terms of the tight claim deadline, it's going to get tighter. with the next phase of CJRS. So be prepared, you know, to have a rapid turnaround in terms of claims. So I'll stop there.
And I think it's important just to point out that there have been people miss the deadline of the 31st of July and there was no comeback. They lost out that claim. There has the appeal process that I've seen, nobody has won that appeal process because HMRC have said we were very clear. The deadline was the 31st of July. So with this deadline on the 30th of November, it's important that everybody remembers that to hit that deadline.
Yeah. And it's getting worse, I think, is what Sam's implying, because it's muted that actually the claim deadlines will be the 14th of the close of the month. And that will be a challenge for many of you, because if you're paying in arrears and doing hours collection, you may find that actually payroll traditionally hasn't got the data by that time. The claim has to be made. So there's make the claim or you don't get the money is a little bit of the message Lou's giving on that 31st cutoff. That cutoff point is getting tighter. So it's get the house in order. There's a few steps there. Make sure your FPSs are going and received on time, and check your online account. If anything looks wrong, question it, because it can get fixed. But if you don't question it and you leave it to 3 months later, you're too late. So there's an element of check, check, check all the way through, just to make sure, especially if you're dependent on this money, to keep your business running.
Yeah.
So any adjustments really that are required should be made by then. So if you made a claim but you think it might need adjusting, that needs to have gone in by the same date as well.
So it's going to be very tight for hours collection. You need to get your methods in so you get those hours worked.
And on review, if you haven't got it right, there's potential for that to be seen as a fraud, presumably.
Yes.
Looking at the wording.
Well, that's what HMRC seem to call it. So if you make an error, they generally call it fraud. They won't always penalise all error, and they accept that people do make mistakes. But if they feel it's a bit common, or you're not really taking the right steps to get it accurate because of sort of negligence, then plus, they want the money back.
I saw that they did an update on the 8th of September saying that they reviewed 27,000 high-risk cases where it believes a serious error may have been made in calculating furlough payments. It believes these errors are part of the fraud. So you know, errors can be. It's strange, isn't it, that those errors are going to be deemed potentially fraud?
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we've repeated month in, month out. We haven't really covered it as a separate topic today, but it still applies. And Andy, I'm sure you're there as well, is if you're operating salary sacrifice arrangements, furlough is post-sacrifice. You can't take it off the money the government have given you. Yeah, that's an employer commitment to meet their contractual rights.
Yeah, and that's for the new scheme. It's the new people that weren't previously eligible that you can now put on when you calculate a reference salary. It'd be the post-sacrifice salary, and it's that sacrifice agreement in place is the employer cost, or you have to put it into your contract, your change. Sorry, Kirsty, you go.
And I was going to say, you know, there is an obligation to have a furlough agreement in writing, which has to be kept, and that's the kind of thing that ought to be in it, and there should be a new one. And if you're going to have one in retrospect, so you've got somebody who's going on it now and they haven't been and they're not on an agreement, you're going to need to do that by the 13th of November.
And presumably someone who comes back, if you allow that individual to return from redundancy, they're going to need to have that furlough agreement in place, let alone all the unpicking. And obviously, if they were in the scheme, you're going to have to put them back in the scheme, and the scheme may have made them no longer a member. So you're going to have to speak to your pension provider to say this person actually needs to be reinstated. Can you please, you know, because you're going to be sending data, but you're going to end up with multiple pots. It's just going to get messy. So speak to your pension provider if you bring people back from redundancy into the new furlough scheme as well.
Now, this slide you have up now, Natalie, there may be a bit of a shock for everyone. So if you brought everyone back, then you're not going into extended furlough. We've got 100 people, so we're going to get £100,000 paid to us in February. You're not.
Yeah.
So I was a bit blunt on that one.
Yeah, this was yeah. Sorry.
Go on.
Carry on.
Go, Sam.
No, I was just going to say this was the question that I had when I realised furlough was back, and CJRS was back, because it occurred to me that, you know, when the Chancellor said the job retention scheme must end, but to kind of give you a bit of a boost, we're going to give you this bonus in February if if you are eligible, then I wouldn't imagine for one moment that the Chancellor thought that that would be the taxable earnings paid in November would be funded by CJRS. And I was relieved to hear the Chancellor confirm yesterday. Well, not relieved. When I say relieved, I don't mean that in the way it might sound. The clarity that provided, because it did pose a big question in my mind, that the job retention bonus was linked to the end of CJRS. And if CJRS was back, then so, that meant, we had to say goodbye to the bonus. But what we have heard is that another scheme will be considered when CJRS ends. Yeah. So it
won't be before April.
No.
Right.
No.
So if people have budgeted in, I don't know, £100,000 worth of the financial year, and that ends to the end of March, you're not going to get it.
No.
You might get it next year, but you may still have to retain the people at that point as well. So at the moment, the job retention bonus is off.
Yeah. I guess it's worth mentioning that there are grants and other things available for employers. So if you are thinking that was there, well, look at the grants and see what else you can do to offset your costs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've discussed this before, haven't we? That the wide range of government support that touches on lots of different areas, and it's important to constantly keep an eye on the gov.uk pages and all of the different devolved nations to see what support is available to you as a business, not just as an employer with your wages. So.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks all. I've moved us along now to off payroll workers. So let's discuss off payroll workers and the implications for business. So it's 5 months. It's 5 months until this is for people to plan for this. So Sam, can you give us a quick update on what is it and who does it impact?
Off payroll working reforms will impact medium and large private and third sector organisations, indeed any organisation that is not a public sector body, from April 2021. Did I say that right? 2021, where you employ an individual who's providing personal services through an intermediary, and most common example of an intermediary in this instance would be a director-owned company, so referred to quite often as a personal service company. IR35 has been around since 2000. It was brought in because it was viewed that employers and individuals were avoiding tax burdens or reducing their tax liability significantly through pay-as-you-earn by working through an intermediary. But they were still effectively an employee. And HMRC have long since believed that there is widespread non-compliance in this field. So 2017 saw the introduction of public sector reforms. So that's the government getting their own house in order first, and now they've been rolled out to medium and large sized businesses, engagers from April 2021. Many of you, and we know because we've polled this in the past, will have been getting ready for it this time last year because it was due to come in from April 2020, but then it got a last minute reprieve due to the pandemic. But we are assured by HMRC that there's going to be no further reprieve in this area. And you may well have noticed HMRC have increased the amount of information available. Just yesterday they updated or created a new page in terms of giving you a quick overview as an engager, as a worker, as a contractor and as a client about what off payroll working is. So that's I tend to go on too long with this, and Simon glazes over, so I'll stop talking at that point.
let's run
Probably
a poll.
would.
We have built one for this slide. So it should be on screens now. So has your off payroll working project started? We've added this answer into this poll recently, as we don't before, as we don't know what off payroll working is, but now we're including we don't have any off payroll workers, all planned and ready, project is ongoing, we've not started but need to. But like I say, maybe we should have also included that final choice. We don't know what off payroll workers is, just in case we have anybody new to call. But please send your...
No, it's not allowed anymore, Natalie. We need people to report.
Yeah.
So we've just got 60% of you have voted. I'm just going to leave it open a little bit longer, and then Andy, I'm going to ask you to comment on the results.
Well, what I hope is it's all planned and ready. What I'm getting is it project ongoing. I'm hoping that everyone's got on board and they're identifying who the off-payroll workers are, and then getting those agreements out between them, are ready for payroll to be ready for April. That's my hope.
Let's see. Those are your results.
Good. The project is ongoing, which is logical, really, because it's 5 months off, so there's time to get it all in place.
Yeah.
They also did change, didn't they, the definition of an intermediary since last time, so it does need revisiting. It's going to be regarded as any company from which a contractor has received or has the right to receive a payment which can be reasonably regarded as a reward for the contractor's services to the end user. So it's much broader than it was going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if you did the work and think I'm all ready to go, possibly just double check.
We have a second poll just to follow on from that one quick, which I'm just put up on screen as well. So we're asking what areas of your business is leading with off payroll working changes. So you can answer, it's been verified we have no off payroll workers, payroll is leading with other areas involved, HR is leading with other areas including payroll involved, finance or procurement are leading, or legal is leading. I'm afraid we could only give you five answers to choose from, so hopefully they work, but I'm sure if there's anything you wanted to add, you can send it through in the question box. And Sam, I'm going to go to you to comment on this one.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. Okay. So what do I think? Oh, crumbs. It's interesting because the purpose of this poll really is to draw out the fact that this is a whole team approach, and actually payroll traditionally are the last people to know. And the lesson learned from the public sector rollout by HMRC is that they need to be very broad in who they speak to about off payroll working with. It's no good ignoring payroll and just focusing on one area of the business. This is very much a team event. So in terms of, I can't remember what the poll questions were. I'm going to say HR is leading. Last minute lucky guess there. Yeah. No.
Just by 9%.
Yeah. No, that's good. Oh, quick. Oh, dear, I'm feeling very, very relieved there. But no, it's important that everybody is involved, because payroll won't know about these individuals because they're not processing their pay. They're processing pay as you earn payments for employees at the moment. HR, I'm pleased to see, are leading, but they, again, within your organisation may not be aware of these individuals because they're not employees. Finance, that whilst they may be paying the invoices of for these individuals, they might not be aware that they are individual services. And so, legal is likely to be the one who does know, but it's important that you bring all of those together, and that there is a task force, depending on the size within your organisation, to address this and to prepare for off payroll working. It is worth saying that if you are not an engager who falls, or a client who falls into the medium or large size category, then IR 35 remains an obligation within the PSC, within the intermediary, but they of course might not know that the engager is small. So if they ask the engager, and this is new from where we were this time last year, if they ask the engager, are you small and therefore excluded from these reforms, then the engager or the client has 45 days in which to respond, either to the agency, who is the fee payer, or to the worker. So you know, that's an important, another important change. And there've been a number of little changes which all kind of build up since this time last year. So if you were ready this time last year or in progress, then make sure that you've updated your knowledge, you know, to take on board the changes that came in because of the election last year. And there was a lot of pressure on HMRC to up its game from everybody who was wanting to win the election, basically. So if I'm going to be blunt. So.
I was just thinking this could be a nice homework project for a number of people to actually assess, and certainly in understanding the legal implications, yes. Even if you don't not necessarily identifying the individuals who may be contractors, if you know you have them, there's a lot of process change you need to look at. So there's an element of reviewing how you engage contractors. What do you do about status classification? Because you're required to status classify them if you're captured into the size of employer or organisation. You have to notify that status to that contractor and their intermediaries that you're working with. There is a dispute process, so you have to deal with disputes that you have to allow, so that needs to be brought into play. You have this obligation to keep records, so you have to keep records for a number of years in relation to that. Your payroll does need to be ready. I'd actually say the payroll aspect is probably the easiest element of the project. I'm not saying that means it's easy, I'm just saying it's one of the easiest elements of the project, because you'll need some pay elements which are taxable and NIable, and some other elements which are not, because you don't tax an NI VAT or expenses associated with provision of the service. You only tax the excess on the invoice amount. And you need to organise your PAYE scheme. Are you having a separate, or are you keeping the one that you have for all your employees? Because it will affect potentially some counts maybe in the future for various things, because those individuals will appear. There is an off-payroll worker marker on the RTI FPS submissions. So is your software ready for that? The SD Works obviously is. And how do you identify the amounts which are going to be subject to tax and NICs and the amounts which are not? And have you budgeted as an organisation, because there are on costs? In other words, you as an engager, if you're seen as the intermediary level type level, will have to pay employers' secondary national insurance contributions and apprenticeship levy on those values as well. So that's a 13.8 plus 0.5% addition on above what you would probably traditionally have paid. Will that change the structure of contracts and how you agree those with these types of organisations for future renewals? Because you may want to think actually we'll claw some of that cost back, but it's not legal to deduct the amounts off them at the moment. Yeah, you can't reclaim your secondary NI liability and your apprenticeship levy liability off the contractor. That would be contrary to the law. Whether you negotiate a lower contract term in the future is a different matter. And it's all this element of understanding the handling of deemed employees. And there are pension implications or not, Andy?
Well, if they're single director-only companies, then all single director-only companies are exempt from automatic enrolment, for instance. But what you've really got to look at is what is your contractual arrangement with those individuals, because personal service workers, so in really the whole process is anyone you're not paying through payroll, whether that's under the IR35 or whether it's just because they're doing work for you, you need to check to see whether or not they're workers. And if they are workers, it could very well, they do fall under automatic enrolment requirements. So it's just looking at it as a wider picture. But if it is a limited company, as we expect legislation to be, and funny enough, our legal team at TPR are looking at all the legislation now around it to see whether or not it's different to what public sector was and so on, to confirm that we think they won't be covered under automatic enrolment because they are limited companies, and it's a limited company then has the duty to automatically enrol the employees of that limited company. If there's only one single director, then it's automatically exempt. So please review the contract to determine if they are actually a worker. If they're a worker, then potentially they come under automatic enrolment. So the HR, very important they're looking at it because they're the ones who do all that sort of stuff and may need professional advice, legal advice to determine what the actual status is of those individuals. You know.
Well, if they were determined as a worker, they'd have holiday rights as well.
Yeah.
We've also had, I was just about to say, we've had a few people asking us, are you confident that IR35 will still be going ahead in April? Is there a possibility of it being deferred again due to current climate? Yeah, I've had about 4 people send in questions in a similar vein.
Can I put my tongue in my cheek, Natalie, and say, where's the Chancellor getting his money to pay for all this furlough stuff? Sorry, the government are aware that there's billions of pounds being assessed as not coming in through IR35 under the old rules, which they would expect to be paid. And this is a method of closing that loop.
Yeah. No, and indeed, I'll be honest, I'm with those 4 questioners because the same thought went through my mind. And actually, when I saw the publication yesterday of this new page on gov.uk that talked about off payroll working, okay, that could have been pre-scheduled. So, you know, prior to the Chancellor standing up and talking, you know, we saw a bit of that over the weekend in terms of pre-scheduled publications. But unless we get another pandemic, I think probably, as Simon said, the taxes have to come from somewhere, and this is a tax reform. This isn't this isn't anything else other than a tax element change, and therefore, I think it is in the law, it will come in. I think HMRC will say, right, you've had the extra year. There's nobody can claim they didn't know it was coming. You know, and I think that was made very clear when it was postponed, and the message has continued throughout. Had HMRC delayed their activities, you know, in terms of education and information, then I might have had more kind of confidence that it could be delayed. But no, I don't have any reason to think that it will be delayed. And even if it was, you still need to be preparing now, because as far as we're aware, you know, it will happen.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's the end of our payroll question time. It's very close to the end, so I think it's just enough time for me just to say thank you. Thank you for everybody for attending, and especially thank you to our panel. It's great to have you back every month to run these sessions. There's a couple of outstanding questions we didn't get to, so what I'll do is I'll share them with our panelists after this event. And like I said, we'll send up the recording to you as well by email, and it will be up on the website. Just a quick one from me as well. I do also include a survey that you will all receive when this webinar closes. It'll be brilliant if you could fill out your responses to that. We also ask if there are any other topics you'd like us to include for the webinar in December. So please send them through, because we do look at that, and it helps us provide a good agenda for the next webinar. So on that note, I'd just like to say thank you and see you all again next month.
Christmas theme, Natalie, don't forget. wear your party frocks.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone, bye.
Bye-bye.